Hello and welcome to the Alpha Software Demo and Q&A webcast. I'm Dave McCormick, VP of Product Management here at Alpha Software. Today's presentation is going to be on something called CSS Grid Containers. This isn't a new feature. It's been around for maybe, 3 years or so, but it's kind of a cool feature, and it's very much related to something that we covered 2 weeks ago. So I'm going to show you how CSS grid containers work, why you would use them. And we're also here to answer questions. You could type questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar control panel. And at this time in the webinar, I'm always asking the same question. Can you guys hear me? And can you see my mouse moving around on the screen? If you could let me know by typing something into the questions box or into the chat window so that I know that I'm coming through, that would be great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right, so let's talk about the CSS grid container. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about something that wasn't the CSS grid container. It was the absolute layout container. The absolute layout container allows you to take an image like we've done here and start laying fields over it in a WYSIWYG format. And what you do is you click and you drag the fields and you place them exactly where you want on your layout. And we explained that this was pretty cool, but one thing that it didn't do was act in a responsive manner. In other words, when you lay things out using this absolute layout container, if you don't have enough pixels to display what you're looking at, for example, you're on a smaller screen size on a desktop, maybe you're looking at it on a phone or a tablet or something like that, what's going to happen is it's going to get cut off, kind of like the text that you see here. So for some things, the absolute layout container is absolutely the right tool to use. But if you want something that's responsive, you're going to want to use a different tool. And this is where CSS Grid is interesting because it is also WYSIWYG. It lets you lay it out not in a tree format, but in a grid format. And we'll take a look at an example right now. Here's a sample real estate form. And so here I've described a property, literally a property, a piece of real estate here on Main Street in Anytown, Ohio. And for all of the fields that were used to collect information about this, I was basically created a grid here in the CSS grid container, and I put the fields in. So I made the image field span this whole area like it does here. I've got my address, city, state, zip, address, city, state, zip. So as I lay it out here, that's how it's going to appear in my final rendition. But the nice thing is that these aren't laid out to exactly pixels, they're laid out to columns and rows, which means that if I were to shrink this down, everything would get smaller with it. Now, it doesn't move stuff onto the next line like you can do with some other techniques, flex containers, things like that. But what you'll find is that it is a really good way to make still a good responsive layout if you know approximately how much screen size you have to work with. Okay, so enough blabbing. Let us go right into the demo. So let me go over to my PC here. And here we are in Alpha Anywhere, and I have already created a UX control. And that UX control is called CSS Grid Before. And here I've just laid out all of the fields that you saw in my example. And if I go into Working Preview, you'll see what it looks like. I've got my image up here at the top. I've got my fields down here below, and that's fine. Now, I could lay this out in a tree view, and I could tell it that I want it to be 33% or 50% and make it kind of responsive that way, which would work fine. UXs are really good at that. But if you want to lay it out using more of a WYSIWYG manner, then what you might instead want to do is use that CSS grid container. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now. So what I'm doing is I'm going to take all of the fields that I would like in the container, and I'm going to select them. And then I'm going to go into Add Control, and we're going to choose Containers. So I'll type CON to find my containers, and there's the container. Now, when I insert the container, I get to choose the container type. And a couple weeks ago, we were talking about the absolute layout. But today, we're going to be using the CSS grid container. So let me go ahead and click OK on that. And now, everything has been placed in the CSS grid container. If I take a look at it, I don't think it's going to look very much different than it did before. Or actually, maybe it'll look quite a bit different. I haven't actually laid it out yet. Well, it's kind of interesting. It sort of took a guess as to how to lay it out. Not bad. But let's go ahead and tell it specifically how we would like this done. So what we'll do is we'll double click here on the CSS grid, and you'll see that it did an okay job trying to figure out what's going on here. But what I want to do actually is start again. So I want to remove all of these things. So you're probably saying, okay, that's cool. I bet what you do is you click on this and there's some X button or something to delete it. That's actually not how it works in this interface. Instead, if you want to remove a particular field, you click on that field and you go here into additional options, and then you can say remove item from grid like I've done here. Great, I've just removed the address bar or the address field. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and clear all of the components from the grid. It's another one of these additional options. So we're going to clear those. And now we have a blank grid, which is 4 columns by 3 rows. I want to make this more granular. So it's not going to be bigger, but I'd like it to divide it up into more rows and more columns, because that's going to give me a little bit of flexibility when I'm laying out things on the screen. So I'm going to go with 16 rows, and I can just do that by hitting the plus button until we get to 16. And I'm going to do the same with columns, 16 by 16. It's going to be a grid just like that. All right, so if I don't put anything here in my grid, the items that I don't place on the grid will still be rendered, but in their default location. In other words, it'll look kind of like it did before we put in the CSS grid container. But I want to put it in a specific way. So I'm going to start over here, and I'm going to click this field. Let's start over around here. And it's going to ask me which control I would like to insert. And the control that I'm going to insert is going to be the image control. So there's image. And now I want to stretch that out so it takes up all this space. So this isn't really a click and drag thing. That'd be cool. Maybe we'll add that. But you can just use these controls over here. So I'm going to say column span. I'm just going to click that plus button till I get to the end. And then row span, I'm going to move that down so that it's mostly square. I think that's square. Good. Now up here, I'm going to place my address field. So let's put an address field. And again, I can make this wider because I want to. We're going to make the column span here, maybe just to the very edge. Now I could push it right against this image if I wanted to, because I'm allowed to insert what's called a column gap in between. So if I did a column gap, it would mean that I'd automatically have a good amount of space here between the address and the image, as you see here. So maybe we'll insert that. A row gap might also be nice. So when I'm putting multiple fields on a row, it might be nice to have a little bit more space. We'll put that in. And now we'll drag in some other fields. So actually, you don't drag them here. You just click here, city. And then we'll do this. We'll make that one, I don't know, a couple of rows, a couple of columns, maybe 4. And then we'll do one for state. Actually, do one more for city, because you can have long city names. And we'll put in the state, which is short because it's always just 2 characters. So we'll leave that just like that. And then for zip, we'll do zip, but we won't put it with a column span of 3. And then we'll do this for other ones as well. Now the built field, we'll put that in. It's like the year it was built, bedrooms, bathrooms, square footage, asking price, email, and phone. So phone and email. All right. So again, I just adjust this by going over here, clicking on the span. It probably doesn't need to be any wider than that. Do that same here. Do the same here. I think you're getting the point. Square footage, asking price, and these last 2 can be a little bit longer. We can get the whole space, doesn't really matter. And then, oops, and then at the bottom, I want to put my description field. If I press the right button here. All right, so I'm going to go over to description, and we'll put that one here. Now, it's important that you place all of the fields in the list, because if you don't, they will be automatically added and usually at a weird place. So if you don't want them in that box at all, just don't include them in your CSS container, but they all have to be placed if you are. So I'm going to say we're going to send this right to the very end. So I'd say column span, I can click this width button. That's cool. And then I'll do a couple rows. And now we'll click OK. And let's go ahead and render that. So we'll go into working preview. And there we go. Basically just as we laid it out. So we have all the fields here on the left, except for the description field, which is underneath. So that is basically it. So again, the reason you'd use one of the CSS grids and say not absolute layout is that you're looking for a responsive design. And the reason you'd use it over just laying out fields in your UX component is that you want to have some WYSIWYG way of sort of laying out the fields in a way that makes sense to you. And this is kind of just a nice interface to look at, which is pretty easy, is the grid. Let me see if I covered everything else I wanted to. I showed you how to remove items, but do take a look here in additional options. You can add columns, remove columns, add row to this beginning, remove row from the beginning. You can remove items from the grid, clear the grid, and you can also auto-populate. In other words, make it guess what the best way is to do that. So that is pretty much it for my presentation. Let's see. Someone's can you add repeating container to a grid? Well, yes and no. Right now, what I've shown you is no, it doesn't work kind of the way that, like, say, view boxes and stuff work with repeating containers. This is really still very much just HTML stuff. But every example I've shown you here has really just been a text field or maybe an image field. But there's nothing stopping you from pressing a list control on that interface. So in other words, if I were in here and I wanted to show a list of items, I could have inserted a list control here, for example, maybe have my detail view below it. So I could definitely show repeating types of things in there. So the next one is, can I have the fields overlap? So say you have a show hide based on another field. It usually adds a little extra space, which makes alignment wonky. So you won't have any spacing issues if you use it this way. And can you show and hide based on another field? Yes. I think you are allowed to overlap fields. Let me go try that. Okay. Let's say I've got, let's take square footage and just put it right up on top of bath. So we'll say its starting row isn't 6, but it's 5. And now look at that. You see they've got these two things conflicting. Now let me see if it's going to let me do that or if it's going to complain. So far, so good. Let's take a look. Yeah. Yeah, it looks like, well, yeah, actually, it looks like we were to place two things directly over each other. So yeah, if you did a conditional show hide, you'd probably be in very good shape for that. All right. See what else. You can also consider responsive CSS font sizes. Yes, you absolutely can. That's a cool one. Let's see what else we've got here. Do we have any other questions? And it doesn't have to be about this. It can be about anything in alpha. Let me see. I think there was one. Can you show import Excel file into a list action? Yeah, let's give that a go. So let's go over here. And I'm going to actually, sorry, I'm just going to close this down. We're going to open up a new UX component. I'm going to save your changes. No. Say new web component UX. The blank. All right, and the first thing we're going to do is put in a list control. All right, create a single list control. I haven't done this in a while, so this may not work, but let's take a look. All right, there's the list. Now we're going to do an action JavaScript that's going to import data into that list. We haven't really defined the list yet, but let's see what we need to do here. And we're just going to add a button. We'll call it import. Double click on that. We'll add a new action. Import data into a list control from an Excel or ASCII file. Very cool. Da-da-da-da. That's nice. Presumably, one of the settings, of course, will be the list that we want to import it into. So target list control name we would set up here. Your component doesn't have any list controls that are based on SQL tables. You can only import based on SQL tables. Well, we can absolutely fix that, can't we? Let's go into our list and define it based on a SQL table. And we'll use a connection string. And I've got one called connection that I'm already using. Oh, I think I have one called test connection. Let's see what's in that one. Fields from table. Let's see what fields I have in that one. Properties. Oh, that might actually be useful. Field list. What was in that field? ID, name, and photo. All right. I'll grab those two just for now. Nice. So now it's built on that. You've not selected any columns by layout. Yes, of course. Thank you. I have to go into list layout and say that I want ID and name. I don't think I need to do much beyond that. Oh, except I've got to identify the list return value. Please go to data source tab and specify the list's return value. Okay. Data source. Return value field, and the return field would probably be the ID. So in other words, when you click on something in the list, what is that object going to come back with? What value? And that'll be the ID. So I'll click OK on that. Let's go ahead and save this. List imports. All right. And now let's go into this button here. Got a new action, and this time we're going to do import data into list control. Import records. You've got a lot of interesting options here. The maximum number of records that you can process, what happens if you exceed that, what the message will be to the user, and all kinds of things, which is very cool. As well as some client-side events that look like fire when you try to upload that file. But anyway, in this case, let's go ahead and choose our list control. It's going to be list one. Hopefully it's not going to complain this time because we have it set up against SQL Server. And we're going to call this import. And we will save that. Now, in a live preview, we'll do a full preview. I already have a server running. I think I already have a server. No, you know what? I might not. Let's start that server. Yes. Oh, never mind. I have it set up to automatically go whenever it's started because I have it running as a service. I'll go back into live preview. This time when I do full preview, I'll tell it no. All right. Okay, there is my list. There's that data. Now we're going to click import, select file, and then presumably we would have to have an XLS file that was in the right format. So maybe I've got an XLS file somewhere, or an ASCII file, I think, or a CSV. Oh, let's make a CSV. Okay, we can do that easily enough. Just open up a notepad, right? Okay, and ID is going to be 1000, and then I think it was the address, so it was 12 Main Street, and then I think these have to be quoted. Oops. Well, I'm back. All right. And I may not have this in the right format for what it wants. But let's see how it works. Save this as, and we will put it in. Oops. Click. I clicked the wrong save as. Hang on a moment. Let's put this on, I don't know, put on desktop or something so I can find it easily. And we will call it import file.txt. All right, so we'll close that. I should see my import file somewhere on my desktop, probably there. We'll click here and we'll go to my desktop, import file.txt. Let's open that, upload it. Number of records imported 1. Well, I think it should have done 2, but maybe it thought that the first one was the field names. So yeah, interesting. No, it doesn't look like it put the IDs in though correctly. So I didn't do something quite right. I would have to go look at the documentation for that. This is the basics of it. If you guys are interested, I can show you the rest of it next week. Let's see what else we've got for questions. Back in the day, we would have, back in the day, we had the option to ask questions that might not have nothing to do with what was initially discussed. Will that option be returning? It will be, as long as I've got the staff and the ability to do that. We did have 2 or 3 other people on at the time. So sometimes I just have to think on my feet. So as MC and presenter, sometimes it's better if I get a question in advance, but I will always give it my best and try. So please feel free to ask me ones. It isn't required that you ask things that are specifically on the agenda. Someone says, another good question from James Talbot. This is back on the CSS grids. Do the unused rows or columns collapse? I don't believe they do. They actually will remain that spacing. So they're not, if they're unused, they're going to be space that'll be in your, on your interface. Next question, is there a multi-tenant version of Alpha Test Drive? You know, there isn't, but that's actually a really good idea. I'm gonna write that down, because I think it's about time that we do another multi-tenant webinar, and that would be a great example. So for those who are wondering, multi-tenant would mean that you would allow multiple people to have multiple accounts. In each account, they could be their own administrators and maybe have their own users underneath them. In other words, creating an application that has got multiple spawns of itself underneath that are each managed by separate people. And we can show you how to do that. That's the basis for doing SaaS applications. Someone said, can I change the background color? I suspect what you mean is in the CSS grid itself. Yes, you can. And in fact, when I was looking at the documentation for that, actually I was finding it in the release notes, they do give you the class names of the things that you can edit to make those changes to that to those cells in the background. So what you would want to do is, let's go here to documentation.alphasoftware.com. And we're going to go with CSS Grid. And if not, I'm going to look in the release notes and see if I can find it there. CSS Grid Container, here we go. There we go. Now this is nicely done. By the way, let me grab this for you because this is the documentation of the stuff that we were covering today. So if you have more questions that I don't get to, there it is right there in the chat window. Send to all. Okay. I bet you it's right in here. Container properties. In the grid container, you can set the columns and rows, but you can also do the CSS here. So let's go back into Alpha. And we'll take a look at my CSS example. I'll say, sure. We'll save that because I want to fix that for you for next time. And let's take a look at the CSS grid. All right. So right here in the container itself, you could set the entire container For the individual cells, though, I think that's in release notes. You know what? If you want to know how to do that, send me an email to guides@alpha, and we'll take a look at that for you. But there is a class name. So what you would do is you would go into the properties of your UX and edit the local CSS definitions, and then you can put in an override. So it would be whatever that class name was. So class name, and then it would just be standard CSS. So it'd be like background color, and then you type in the color, say blue. All right. Let's see, other questions. Will a list that's been populated programmatically show the indicators if changes have been made while the list is offline? Yeah, in other words, if you're using, say, JavaScript to insert a new row into a list, and it hasn't synchronized, yes, it should know that. That is designed to work that way. So we got here. For JSON repeating sections, do you have to write code to submit the data? Ours doesn't do anything when you click submit. JSON repeating section. Oh, you mean JSON repeating sections? Do you have to write code to submit the data? Ours doesn't do anything. If you could write that down a little bit more, I would be happy to tackle that. But it sounds like what you're using is you're in JSON repeating sections, maybe for a JSON form box, where you're trying to submit data back into a database, and what has to go behind that control. That's a good question. On a list control, when using a chart layout, is it possible to add a legend and or value labels to the chart? And if so, how do you do that? A list control using a chart layout. Let's take a look. Save now. New UX. I wonder if we have any with charting in it anyway. Google Charts. That is the question. Are you using a standard chart, or are you using a Google chart or something else? Would be probably my first question, but we'll take a look with a standard chart. So I'll just click. Okay, we'll start with a blank. And we will do, oh, I see what you mean. It's the chart view in a list. All right, we'll take a look at that. So we'll do list. Double click on that. Let's put in some static data. Sample data, names and addresses are always good. We'll put that in. Okay. Actually, that wouldn't be useful for a graph, would it? Let's find something else. Maybe we got something with numbers in it. Sample data. There's the pipeline. Nested list and charts. Okay. Interesting. Not sure what this gobbledygook is here, but it looks like name, point 1, point 2, point 3. Okay. That's fine. Those properties. Layout. Let's put in all of these. And now for the style of the list. Class. Sorry, I'm blanking on how to change that style here. Let's take a look at the top. All right. Here we go. Layout properties. Chart. Here we go, under layout type, and then layout chart settings. Now this is where I would expect you would be setting up the legend and things like that. So we're going to choose chart definitions. We're going to choose select, and we'll select a chart from the gallery. And I don't know, let's try a pie chart. I don't know what we, I don't know what's good for the data that we've selected, but we put this in here. Okay. And I suspect that see what it looks like. That's the sample though. All right, you know what? This is how we get into the chart layout settings, but I don't know the answer to that question, so I'm going to have to answer that later on. Okay, any other questions that I see here? Can you change the background color? We got to that. Multi-tenant, we got to that one. Two rows collapse, nope. Fields overlap, yep. All right, well, that looks about it. The ones that I didn't get, I've written down a few of them, but if there's something in particular, you can always send it to guides, GUIDES@alphasoftware.com. Thanks very much, everyone, for joining me here today, and I hope to see you at our next webinar. Until then, take care and stay well. Bye-bye.